What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie. This is part 2 of my ranking of Black Sabbath studio albums. We're in the 80s, the 1980s. 6 albums, bunch of different lead singers. Don't really have many hot takes on this other than, or my hottest take probably is, and I don't think it's that hot of a take, is that none of these should have been called Black Sabbath albums. One of them was supposed to be an Iommi solo album. One of them was supposed to be like a super group. Anything with Dio sounds like Dio. By the late 80s, it's just kind of, at its worst, generic hard rock. At its best, enjoyable hard rock. Really, I think there's like not very many songs that just remind me of like classic Sabbath, which, you know, bands are allowed to evolve, but I'm not sure this is it. You had no OZZY, and then you had no Ward, and then you had no Butler, but you always had no OZZY, and then no OZZY, and then no OZZY. And what's Black Sabbath without OZZY? I mean, OZZY is not just the singer of the band. OZZY is Ozzy Osbourne. Not a horrible waste of a decade, but as the 80s did to so many bands, it got the best of them. My rankings, I'm going to be really clear on this, are my favorite. I do think the one that I'm going to talk about first, the one that I have ranked last, is probably not as bad as an album as I'm ranking it as. But my own levels of extreme disappointment are going to bake into that rankings, because one of these albums to me not only is bad, but just the disappointment level with what I was maybe expecting, it can't recover. But yeah, 6 albums. I'll talk about these 6 in the order from what I think is best, worst to least in this 80s, and then I will meld this list with the 70s and put that up at the end. So yeah, let's get on with Black Sabbath in the 1980s. My number 6 is 1983's Born Again. The cover is either the worst or the best cover in the history of music. I can't decide. I mean, what demon child baby from, oh yeah, that's a juicy cover. This is the most disappointing album by far for me in the catalog. It's essentially Black Sabbath, so I think Ward left, he's back. We have everybody but OZZY, but on vocals is Deep Purple's Ian Gillan, and that should be awesome. If I had to choose between Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, as I could only listen to one band for the rest of my life, out of those two, I would go Deep Purple. I'm a Deep Purple fan. I'm a hardcore Deep Purple fan. This should be fantastic, but Ian doesn't sound that good. He sounds like he's trying too hard. He doesn't necessarily match whatever sound they're going for. He has said in later years that he was the worst singer Black Sabbath ever had. Not the worst singer, but maybe produced the worst album as far as the singing goes. Plus, the drum sound, the guitar sound, the mix, the overall production. It is, to me, incomprehensibly bad. It's not even representative of the 80s bad. It's just a bad mix. I don't even understand what some of the sounds are. I don't understand how they're miking the drums. I don't understand why the drums sound the way they do, or the guitars. I don't understand any of this album. There are really moments in here where you're like, oh my gosh, there is so much potential in this song. And then it just sounds horrible. Just a very disappointment level at a 900. The best 2 songs are these short little instrumentals. Stonehenge, which, and you can't make this stuff up, but then someone did, is for this tour, they had a Stonehenge built, which was going to be on stage, but it was too big to use. A couple years later, or the next year, right? Heck, I guess it was the next year, Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap used a Stonehenge, only it was too small, and it was in danger of being trampled by a dwarf. So, yeah, this album is just inexplicably bad to my ears. It's probably better than the next couple I have on this list as far as overall potential and what's happening, but there are so many things I just personally don't like about it. I can't rank it above the others. Trashed, just I think the mix is so bad. The guitar tone is so bad, the opening number. Stonehenge, really cool, nice, atmospheric little instrumental number. Kind of like this. Disturbing the Priest, cool change in this. Some cool energy. But I think the drums just sound horrendous. The Dark, another cool instrumental. Awesome build right into the next song, Zero the Hero, which has kind of a cool prog metal groove, probably the highlight of the album. Almost has I'm not sure if this is intentional or if just the production makes it have like a Ministry goes metal type industrial vibe, which kind of works. Not sure the song is that good, like the vocal melody part, but the music is pretty interesting. Digital Bitch is kind of flirting with at times an 80s Judas Priest, at times a 70s Deep Purple. Don't like the lyrics at all, but musically there's something there. The title track, kind of a ballad that kind of lulls you in a little ways. It's synthy, bass, darkness, ballady. I'm not sure if it's hard rock. It's just, well, I don't even know what genre this is, but it kind of is interesting. Hotline is just some like riff-driven hard rock, some metal rock, some just but tired ideas. And then the closing, Keep It Warm. Has a neat little jam in the middle, has kind of a cool groove, kind of has a cool outro vibe. The second half of the song is particularly interesting. It's about 5.5 minutes long. Doesn't sound like Sabbath at all. Every time I listen to this, for some reason, I want to go listen to Fireball by Deep Purple. Just the energy of this kind of reminds me of Fireball energy, but I think Fireball's a far, 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 far more interesting album. And the highlights are the less than 2 minute Stonehenge and the 45-second The Dark. This album, I just can't. It's my number 6 for the 80s, Born Again. But that album cover, something's there, man. All right, on to slightly better stuff. Number 5 is 1987's The Eternal Idol. Iommi is the only original member of the band at this point. Eric Singer on drums, Bob Daisley on bass, Jeff Nichols on keyboards. And apparently a whole bunch of people tried to be the vocalist. They had an original vocalist. He recorded the vocals, ended up being fired or quitting the band. They brought in Tony Martin. And Tony Martin was tasked with replicating or just listening to the original vocalist who was, God, what was his name? No idea what his name was, Ray Gillan. And then not being Tony Martin, but to sound like Ray Gillan. So it just comes across as this generic hard rock vocalist. And I think most of the album comes across as just kind of generic late 80s hard rock. Doesn't sound like Sabbath. I think the last song on here, the title track, Eternal Idol, is probably the only thing that kind of flirts with Sabbath energy. It's got some doom, stoner, slower, just that kind of menacing vibe. By far the heaviest thing on the album. It's got a nice, slowly building doom vibe. It's a pretty interesting song. Going into the next album, maybe like, oh, maybe they figured something. Oh, no, they didn't. Though the next album is better than this, as it's not been on this list yet. There's a song called Ancient Warrior, second song on here, that has a lot of potential in it. There's some nice, weird synth noises, some guitar, bass, musical sections that are pretty good. But I just think almost all the songs are just kind of generic. Martin's vocals, which aren't representative of Martin, are kind of generic. And anytime I'm sort of in a song and then the vocals start, I'm just like out, because it just sounds like a lot of generic hard rock 80s bands. The Shining, average 80s hard rock song to start off. Ancient Warrior has potential, but the drums are kind of plodding. The drums are kind of have that 80s sort of reverb sound. Not horrendous, but at times it's a little, doesn't help the songs. Hard Life to Love has some nice hard rock energy, upbeat, good groove, good riff. Glory Ride, really nice sort of big, thick guitar intro, But then we drop into a song that just becomes generic hard rock. Born to Lose, generic hard rock. Nightmare. Starts off with some like tinkly, almost Christmas wintry type synthy vibes before we go into this kind of cool mid-tempo groove. But once the vocals come along, it's just like the potential's wasted. Scarlet Pimpernel is a gentle ballad and instrumental. It's like 2 minutes long, harmless. Lost Forever is a pretty good track. The last two tracks on this album I actually maybe redeem it if that's possible. Kind of nice driving guitar riff, a la like Judas Priest. Nice, just taut rock energy. Again, the vocals aren't doing anything for me. Really nice solo. Some nice guitar riffage throughout this thing. Iommi's bringing it. Iommi's the savior on this album and on many of these 80s albums, if you ask me. But just kind of an inoffensive, average hard rock album from the late 80s. My number 5, The Eternal Idol. My number 3 is 1989's The Headless Cross, not The Headless Cross. Or is it that? No, just Headless Cross. Martin's still on vocals. Iommi is the only original member here. Jeff Nichols on keys. Lawrence Cottle on bass. And Cozy Powell has shown up to play drums. I've never been much of a Cozy Powell fan. I know there are a lot of people are. But I do think his drum sound, I think he's really a little too heavy and plodding on the drums. And I don't think he's helping much. I know there are Powell fans out there, but I'm not one of those. Tony Martin gets to sound like Tony Martin on this. So he's got a much more menacing, natural tone, a little more aggression, a little more of a darker, more appropriate to Sabbath metal vibe. Still don't think it sounds like Sabbath, but I think it's a step up from the previous album, mainly because the vocals don't immediately make me check out. The best track on here is the bonus track that came out in this past year, Cloak and Dagger. I don't know if it was available prior to that, but I know it's on like a recent release. Really good chunky riff, really cool groove. Vocals are still but pretty strong track. It closes out a recent release of this. It's available on streaming. I know that. Reminds me of the bass has this doom, doo, doom, doo, doo, Alana Miles Black Velvet vibe that works really well with the Iommi's playing. Iommi again sounds fantastic on here. Opens up with a short little instrumental, The Gates of Hell, which goes right into the opening track, Headless Cross. Vocals don't do much for me, though they are better than the previous album. Nice heavy music. I think the best track other than the bonus track is Devil and Daughter. It's got a bigger, almost a radio-friendly hard rock pop groove to it. It's kind of aggressive, some good energy. I think it's easily the standout on this album. There are moments of other songs that may be more interesting, but this from start to finish is, I think, the most solid 4.5 minutes on this album. When Death Calls is like a ballady theme that goes from soft to loud bigs. Brian May guests on this and drops a solo. Got a nice groove about halfway through, a little kind of all over the place, but interesting little song. Kill in the Spirit World is another pretty good song, kind of a poppier hard rock vibe. Some nice proggy little middle sections. We get this nice short breakdown where things get like dark and ominous and like synth spacey. A lot of really neat, cool changes that make it more interesting. Not sure the actual song itself, like the melody / vocals, are that interesting. But when we get into the musical passages, it's a lot more adventurous than the previous album. Call of the Wild, typical hard rock with a good solo. Don't need any more hard rock songs called Call of the Wild. Black Moon, a little more playful than some of the other stuff. Some nice good energy. And then Nightwing, the official closing song, kind of one of those that kind of builds a slow building ballady vibe. Not a bad album. Can't say it's a great album. It's not a horrible listen. Having Tony Martin be himself, I think, puts a little more swag in the overall vibe and the overall energy of the album. But it's a late 80s hard rock album. It's not Black Sabbath. I mean, not to me. But anyways, yeah, that would be my number 4 from the 80s. My number 3 is 1986's Seventh Star. I believe it was 86. This was intended to be an Iommi's solo album, but I think the label pressured him into making it a Black Sabbath album, which I think hurts it, only because the name Black Sabbath has expectations to it. You go into it, you know, comparing it to anything from the 70s almost. There's no OZZY again, and there's no OZZY again. But there is Glenn Hughes on vocals, who was also in Deep Purple when Coverdale was in there, and I think put out some underrated, really good albums. Was sang a couple good songs. And I do think, oddly enough, Hughes sounds more like Ian Gillan, who was on the previous Black Sabbath album, and this album overall kind of sounds like more of a Deep Purple album than the one that had Ian Gillan on it. Eric Singer on drums, Dave Spitz on bass, Jeff Nichols on keyboards. Not a perfect album. There's a couple songs I don't care for, but for the most part, I really, really just like the energy of this album. Opens up with In for the Kill, which is just like a really nice, has good energy to it, just a solid hard rock song, not a Sabbath song, solid hard rock song. No Stranger to Love, I can do without. Bad metal ballady energy, kind of reminds me of late era Rainbow, like when they got into synths and stuff, like 80s Rainbow, but not in a good way. Turn to Stone kind of reminds me, it's like a Deep Purple, almost Fireball drive to it, like an early 70s hard rock vibe that works. Yeah, just really awesome. There's this nice solo in here. There's a nice riff. Turn to Stone works. Sphinx the Guardian is this sort of floating synth instrumental, a la something off like Pink Floyd's The Endless River. Just kind of has that calming, washing vibe that goes right into the awesome, awesome stomp of the title track. Just song itself is average when we get to like the actual melody and the vocals. But just the energy is really good. And the 1-2 punch of the Sphinx going into 7 star, it really works well together. Yeah, good musical energy. Danger Zone, despite the horrible title, nice 80s hard rock riff to open, kind of a mid-tempo, cliched, kind of generic hard rocker. But I don't know, it's like listening to this, I'm taken back to the best parts of 80s hard rock. And it's not a great song, but for me, it's almost comfort food. You know, reminds me of like a teenager. Nice up-tempo riff that comes in kind of like 2/3 of the way through that also still is radio generic, but the stuff I would have turned up back when I was a kid. Heart Like a Wheel is just really good. Just an awesome straight-on metal blues jam. Drums sound horrible. Nonetheless, Iommi gets a nice sort of extended solo in here. The rhythm section's kind of holding it back a little bit, but it's got a nice, just kind of slowly grinding vibe that works for me. Guitar playing, Iommi. This is like Heart Like a Wheel is like the song that I think might have been the like, had it been a solo album, like this is the centerpiece of the album. Iommi's really, you know, showing off his chops. Angry Heart, kind of generic, and then Love Last, In Memory. Kind of has a slower, ballady, emotional vibe. Definitely not Sabbath, but kind of works. It's not a perfect album by any stretch. It's a little generic at times, but I do think there are moments that are good. And I really like Glenn Hughes as a singer. He can sound like Ian Gillan. He can sound like sort of other hard rockers at the time. Doesn't really sound like OZZY ever, but I don't think is in any way bad. I think this is a pretty serviceable album and pretty enjoyable. But that would be my number 3, 7th star. And for my number 2 and my number 1, I'm going to do this together because it's the 2 Ronnie James Dio albums. APPICE is the drummer on the second of the 2, 1981's Mob Rules. And the first one is the original Black Sabbath, but just with Ronnie James on vocals. And they're Dio hard rock, man. That's what this is. And they're really good at that. Mob Rules was sort of written off at the time, or maybe not written off, but if there was a complaint about it, it was just kind of a B grade version of Heaven and Hell. And I kind of think that maybe not a B grade, but it's kind of in the same vein. And I do think Heaven and Hell just feels a little bit more inspired. Mob Rules, 1981. Some really good solid songs on here. Turn Up the Night opens up. Just some nice riff driving hard rock, man. Just, yeah, just not as immediate as the opener on Heaven and Hell, but it's a great opener. Voodoo, really nice opening riff, kind of a more chugging energy, a little bit heavier, great guitar solo. Sign of the Southern Cross starts off as a ballad, then we get a pretty nice, satisfying, heavy drop about 1.5 minutes in. It's kind of slow and groovy, great guitar atmospherics, longer song, like close to 8 minutes, a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the middle of the song, nice and playful. E5150, our first of a couple songs that would be called 5150 in the 80s. A nice instrumental, weird, spacey, noise, moody type stuff. And then The Mob Rules, one of the better tracks on the album, closes out the first half of the album. Just a really nice hard rock groove with a line that is really applicable today. If you listen to Fools, the mob rules. Second half starts off with Country Girl, really nice sort of head banging, kind of like not like a fast head banging, but a slow, you just want to like sway and bang your head type groove. Doesn't sound like a Country Girl song, but great song. Slipping Away, very Zeppelin-esque, sort of mid-period Zeppelin sound, that big sort of like Houses for the Holy, physical graffiti type, trampled, sort of that kind of ocean, big kind of groovy, chunky vibe. Almost feels like a Presence outtake, maybe, like something that Zeppelin did that maybe just missed the cut on Presence, but a pretty good song, fun, playful. Falling Off the Edge of the World, nice guitar ballad energy, really dramatic. We get this really nice driving riff. Feels like a very, in a way, a formulaic late 70s hard rock song, but it's not bad. And then Over and Over gives us a little bit of a doomy vibe to start before we go into a ballad with a nice solo. Not a bad album, but I think easily their best album of the 80s is 1980's Heaven and Hell. It's the original band with the addition of Ronnie James. So I just think you're not putting together as many different pieces. It's really just one. The rest of the band is there, and it's not OZZY, but it's pretty good stuff. Kind of reminds me of really solid Rainbow. Neon Nights opens up with a really nice driving, almost Judas Priest-esque type groove that works. Children of the Sea, kind of a ballady, proggy, late 70s vibe into some like harder rock groove, a really nice drop, some tasty solos. Kind of feel like if this could be any late 70s sort of proggy band, like if Tommy Shaw or Dennis DeYoung were singing this, it could be a Styx song. I don't know who the lead singer for Kansas is, but I don't know Kansas that well, maybe not Kansas, but there is something kind of like generically late 70s about that song, Children of the Sea. Lady Evil, one of the highlights of the album, just really nice, tight, hard rock sound. Kind of a bass line, kind of reminds me of Hot Blooded a little bit. The chorus reminds me of a Rainbow song, great solo. It's, again, doesn't sound like Black Sabbath. It just sounds like really, really good late 70s hard rock. The title track, nice sludgy riff and vibe. Goes well with the title. Some really nice bass, nice vocals, and a really nice up-tempo groove. You get this like acoustic outro. Nice long. I think it's the longest song on the album. A little more interesting, a little more proggy. Pretty good track. Wishing Well, upbeat hard rock groove. Dio says Rainbow in the vocals, which, yeah, hey, conceptual continuity. Die Young, you get like a spacey synth with some lone guitar playing in there, that kind of intro to the song. We get a drop about a minute into a nice upbeat driving groove. Feels too short, but how long? It's only like less than 5 minutes, but this is some of the heavier parts on the album. Walk Away could be a pop hard rock radio song, and then Lonely is the Word. Just a really slower, heavier, dramatic hard rocker. There's an awesome riff throughout that just kind of weaves around the song. It's slower, but it works really well. It's a good ending to the album. It's a little more patient, lets things just kind of happen, but a good ending. I would say this is easily their strongest of the 80s. It doesn't really sound like Black Sabbath, but it's a good hard rock album. But there's no OZZY. And I love DIO, but if I had to pick between DIO and OZZY, I'm going with OZZY. All right, but that's my 1 and my 2 of the 80s. That's what these 6 look like in typewritten form right there. And then this is what they look like incorporated with the 70s right there. So I have all the 70s albums, or at least the first 6 at the top. Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules, and 7th Star sneak in there. I like Technical Ecstasy. It's not really a Black Sabbath album, but I think there's some interesting, if somewhat flawed, moments on that album. And then we're going to drop in the Tony Martin albums. And we got that train wreck that is Born Again. And then Never Say Die, I think, confidently occupies that last spot for me. Probably, I don't know, maybe Born Again. That's such a disappointment, Born Again, but it's better than that. So that's where my rankings stand for now. All right, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Let me know your thoughts on these albums, all that kind of stuff. You know how comments work. And go listen to some DIO Sabbath. DIO Sabbath. They should have just been a new band. They should have just come up with a new name. Black Bow. Combination of Rainbow and Black Sabbath. Rain Sabbath. There's potential there. Black. No, okay. I'm done. Peace. Talk to you later.